Here's a review of the anatomy of the heart in preparation for the assessment coming up on Monday and Tuesday. Remember that we're focused on three different components of the anatomy: the blood vessels, the chambers, and the valves. Also remember that we use blue to designate deoxygenated blood and red to designate oxygenated blood. Let's start by looking at the major blood vessels. There are two categories of major blood vessels, as you know: the veins, which carry blood to the heart, and the arteries, which carry blood away from the heart. When we look at the veins, there's two categories of veins. We have the vena cavae, which are composed of the superior and the inferior. They're carrying deoxygenated blood into the right atrium of the heart. The superior vena cava comes from the arms, shoulders, upper chest, neck, and head. The inferior vena cava is bringing blood from below the heart. The pulmonary veins, there are two sets, a right set and a left set. The right set is coming from the right lung, the left set is coming from the left lung. They're carrying oxygenated blood into the left atrium. So blood coming from the lungs is going to be oxygenated, coming into the left atrium of the heart. We look at the arteries. There's also two categories of arteries. We have the aorta and we have the pulmonary arteries. Remember that arteries are carrying blood away from the heart. The aorta takes the blood away from the heart out to the body. That's oxygenated blood coming from the left ventricle going out to the body. The body, as we know, needs the oxygenated blood. The aorta is the vessel that provides the oxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood that came into the heart from the vena cava, which is the vein, is moved by the right ventricle out through the pulmonary arteries. First goes through the pulmonary trunk and then branches left and right to go to each of the lungs. Let's see what it looks like when we look at the diagram of a heart. Notice that this diagram isn't color-coded. You want to be able to look at a non-color-coded diagram and be able to identify the features that you're asked to identify. So when we look at this diagram here, let's talk about the blood vessels. We'll use our color codes to represent the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and we'll use arrows to indicate the direction of blood flow. Let's start with the veins. We know that oxygenated blood comes from the lungs and into the heart, and it does that through the pulmonary veins. So here are the pulmonary veins which come into the left atrium. The left atrium would be located here underneath the left auricle. That's oxygenated blood coming from the lungs into the left atrium of the heart. Remember that when we look at the heart, this is our left and this is our right. The next set of veins that are important to us carry deoxygenated blood. So the blood's coming into the superior vena cava at the top and the inferior vena cava at the bottom. This blood flows into the right atrium. And here is your left atrium. So the right atrium is receiving blood from the superior vena cava above and the inferior vena cava below into the right atrium. Next, let's look at the arteries. We'll start with the aorta. The aorta, this is the aortic arch. The aortic arch, which is the beginning part of the aorta coming out of the heart, comes out of the left ventricle. The left ventricle would be located here, and that's oxygenated blood that's moving out of the aorta to the body. Out of the aorta to the body. The other important artery is moving deoxygenated blood to the left lung and to the right lung through the pulmonary arteries. So the pulmonary trunk moves blood out of the heart from the right ventricle out to the lungs. Let's do a quick review. We have the pulmonary veins entering the left atrium. We have the veins referred to as the vena cava, the superior and inferior vena cava, bringing blood into the right atrium. We have the aorta, which is an artery coming out of the heart. It comes out of the left ventricle and moves oxygenated blood out to the body. And we have the pulmonary artery here, branching left to the left lung and right to the right lung, coming out of the right ventricle. Okay, so one more time. We'll do a different color. We'll go with pink. Pulmonary veins, left here, right here. Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. Aorta, pulmonary artery. That takes care of the blood vessels that we need to know for now. Now we can look at the chambers and the valves. Remember, we have the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. So we have the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the left atrium and the left ventricle. So take a moment to get yourself oriented. So those are the four chambers: the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the superior and inferior vena cava. That deoxygenated blood moves into the right ventricle, passing through the right atrioventricular valve. The right atrioventricular valve is also known as a tricuspid valve. It has 3 cusps in the valve. 1, 2, 3. The right ventricle then moves that deoxygenated blood out through the pulmonary valve here to the lungs. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the pulmonary veins. So we have blood coming in from the left lung, we have blood coming in from the right lung, and that oxygenated blood moves through the left atrioventricular valve, which is also known as the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. It has 2 cusps looking at the valve, 1, 2. Then the oxygenated blood is then forced out of the left ventricle through the aortic valve and into the aorta to then move out to the body. So we have 4 chambers: the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, the left ventricle. We have 4 valves. We have the right atrioventricular valve. We have the left atrioventricular valve. Those valves are doorways between the right and the left atria and the ventricles that they feed into. Then we have the pulmonary valve, which guards as a gate between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. And we have the aortic valve, which is the gatekeeper for the aorta between the left ventricle and the aorta. The purpose of the valves is to keep the blood flowing in one direction. So it goes from the right atrium into the right ventricle, and when the right ventricle contracts, the valve keeps the blood from flowing back into the atrium. Same with the left. Same with the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. Once the blood pushes through the valve closes to prevent blood from flowing back. So let's look at the diagram and see what that looks like. Now we have cut the heart open here, and we've got our superior vena cava, deoxygenated blood coming into the right atrium. We have the inferior vena cava, where blood also enters the right atrium. We have the deoxygenated blood that moves from the right ventricle out through the pulmonary valve, into the pulmonary trunk, out to the, remember this is left and this is right, out to the left lung, and it also branches going under the aorta and out to the right lung. So that's deoxygenated blood. Then we have our oxygenated blood that's coming in from the left lung through the left pulmonary vein, entering the left atrium, and in through the right pulmonary veins, passing on the dorsal side, the back side of the heart, and coming into the left atrium. Then the left atrium moves blood into the left ventricle through the bicuspid mitral valve, the left atrioventricular valve. And then when it contracts, it pushes, and you have to look carefully at this diagram. Let's see if I move this circle here. You can see the aortic valve there. So the oxygenated blood is then pushed through the aortic valve into the aorta, so it would be in here, where it then goes off to the places that it's needed. So once again, a review of the valves and the chambers using our bright green. Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. The four valves: right atrioventricular valve, also known as the tricuspid valve. Left atrioventricular valve, also known as a bicuspid, because it has two cusps, bicuspid, or mitral, M-I-T-R-A-L, and I'm off the page there, I apologize. And then we have our pulmonary valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. And then, I'll clean this up a little bit, we have our aortic valve between the left ventricle and the aorta. So those are the four chambers: right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, and the four valves: tricuspid, bicuspid, pulmonary, and aortic valves. Hopefully this is a good review for you, and it can help you be prepared for the assessment on Monday and Tuesday. Good luck. If you have any questions, please send me an email, and I'm happy to try and help. Have a good weekend.